on. Hi. Yep, as Nathan said, I'm lead UX designer at Jump. And I want to talk to you tonight about how the world sees the web. And it's really about how we make assumptions as users kind of based on our cultural backgrounds and where we're based, what we've been brought up with, what our expectations are, and how we can be more aware of that. And that can make us really better designers in the way we approach things. Have I got a clicker? Or have I just... That's all right.
You sure it's fine?
Yeah, it's fine. So just to introduce things, I want to play you a clip. I don't know if everybody's seen Pixar's Inside Out. Great film, if not. The concept is that the little girl who grows up throughout the film, you see the emotions inside of her head represented by these characters, and they kind of play out the inside inner workings of her mind. So I'm just going to play you a quick clip.
Here we go. All right, open.
This looks new.
Think it's safe?
What is it?
Okay, caution. There is a dangerous smell, people. Hold
Sorry.
on. What is that?
This is disgust. She basically keeps Riley from being poisoned, physically and socially.
That is not brightly colored or shaped like a dinosaur. Hold on, guys. It's broccoli! Yeah! Well, I just saved her lives. Yeah, you're welcome.
Riley, if you don't eat your dinner, you're not going to get any dessert.
Wait, did he just say we couldn't have dessert?
That's anger. He cares very deeply about things being fair.
So that's how you want to play it, old man? No dessert? Oh, sure. We'll eat our dinner right after you eat this.
Right. Here comes an airplane.
Oh, airplane. We got an airplane, everybody.
Okay, so how do I get back? Ooh, broken everything. Thanks. So, as you can see, anger and disgust were reacting to the broccoli on the plate, and I'm sure if anybody who has had kids, getting them to eat something like broccoli is quite a challenge. But actually, the Japanese version of the film had a slightly different scene at that point. I don't know if you can see closely down there that they use green peppers instead of broccoli. Apparently, strangely enough, Japanese children really love broccoli. And I really like the fact that they noticed that, the fact that they had the cultural awareness to know that that was true. And then they put the effort into changing those particular scenes of the film to reflect that cultural difference so that it then had the same meaning for Japanese audiences. And there are quite a lot of different moments throughout the film where they allowed different regions to choose differences so that it really resonated with people in those particular areas. And that's really an example of what I want to talk about tonight. Why does culture matter? How do we get it right as designers? And then ultimately, why is it worth it? Why is it worth it for our users? And why is it worth it for the businesses and organizations that we work for? So firstly, why does culture matter? Well, it matters because if we get it wrong, it can be quite embarrassing. It can sometimes be offensive, but ultimately it undermines the trust and the relationships that we're trying to build with our customers. So let's go to language first and the it can be embarrassing if we get it wrong thing. There are hundreds of these out there on the internet, the bad translations, but I've just picked a few. It's intriguing chicken of your mother. There's even more intriguing stuff only. This on a printer, do not use the problem. And then this next one is my favorite, on a plate of meatballs at an international hotel. Paul is dead. And it's funny and we share them and we laugh at them, but actually if you notice that that is an international hotel, they've somewhat undermined their kind of international status in not being able to correctly translate things, and it makes us kind of laugh at them, which is not particularly positive. So the next thing I want to look at is flags. They can cause us quite a lot of problems, and I experienced that quite early on in my career as a designer. So I thought I'd introduce it with Sheldon's Fun with Flags, Big Bang Theory. These are the flags that I had to put on a website. It was an outdoor clothing website that had prices and shipping to different countries. I don't know if you can see from there, I've made them really small because in my defense, they were really small when I picked them. But I don't know if you can see the Spanish flag on the left there and notice that there's anything wrong with it. Here's a zoomed in version. This is a Spanish flag, but it's a Spanish flag which was used during the reign of the fascist dictator Franco. So not massively appropriate for a Spanish audience, probably quite offensive. Luckily for me, it was pulled before the website actually went live, so that was my bacon saved by somebody else. Flags can generally be quite risky. This example is quite interesting. I don't know if anybody has used this. It's a plugin for accessibility that you can add to a website. It allows you to change contrast. It has various different tools to help people with visual impairment. And it also has a language option, translation option. And what they've done here is they've got the languages on the left and the flags of the countries on the right. But they've mixed up the country codes with the flag codes. So where it says Afrikaans there, they've obviously wanted the South African flag. They've put SA in, and it's brought through the Saudi Arabian flag. So all of the countries and all of the flags are completely uncorrelated and made absolutely no sense. Again, kind of undermining that trust that we have in that particular organisation. And I think it's a positive thing that brands are starting to move away from flags. The other issue with them is that they relate specifically to countries. So if we're wanting to communicate language, perhaps on a shop website, if we use a French flag, we're specifically saying the country of France and not just the language French. So I'm pleased to see that a lot of companies are moving away from that and using language instead of using the visual representation of flags. So there's just a few examples of how we can get it wrong. So how do we get it right? I think there's a lot of reasons that we can do that and a lot of ways that we can put thought into that. And there's two reasons why we might do that. Firstly, globalization. So we want to get things right because we want to speak to a global audience. A website out there might have many different audiences, and we don't want to make those cultural assumptions that kind of limit who we're speaking to. The second reason is localization, and that is if we have the budget to speak to specific audiences in a unique capacity, perhaps with separate sites, separate apps, we can actually put effort into understanding those exact cultures and speaking to them specifically. So how do we do that? There's a lot of different ways, and I've just picked up just a few things that can differ from country to country and culture to culture. Huge amount to be aware of and to take in, and that's where perhaps if you know you're localizing for a particular culture, you can really do your homework and make it work. I'm going to look at a few, so name formats, icons and symbols, and briefly at language as well. So name formats. This is your average form field with a first name and surname, and validation that means you can't proceed to the next step without filling in both fields. However, in some countries around the world, specifically Indonesia, people don't have surnames. So that is instantly a barrier for some people who can't fill that in, can't proceed. So how do we solve that? I was really pleased to see this design pattern appear in the .gov.uk kind of guidelines, recommending that you use this single bar for a name entry in a form field. So if you're aware that you want that to be a broad field for any user, then that approach is going to be much more accessible for your users. So moving on to icons, you would think that icons, they don't have the problem of language, that they would be really universal for people to accept and understand. But again, we make those cultural assumptions based on what we're used to. So the hamburger icon, fairly universally accepted, but over in China, they tend quite rarely to use that. They quite often use a compass icon, which they call Discover, and that is the thing that will launch a hidden menu in a lot of cases. I wondered whether, and I don't have any research to back this up, but the character for the number 3 in Chinese is quite similar to the hamburger, and I wondered whether that was a reason that they hadn't used that very commonly. And the other one is the search, what it's called now, magnifying glass, the search icon. You would think that that was really quite universal, but when Amazon did some research in rural parts of India, people were referring to it as the tiny ping pong bat, which I thought was really funny, and I'm not going to see it in the same way again now. And they didn't change it, but they solved it by just putting some explanation in there, but either in English or in Indian languages, to explain what that particular part of the site was for. Another one that Amazon discovered could alienate particular people was the shopping cart. If you imagine that you've grown up in a rural part of India, you might not have access to a large supermarket. If you've never seen a shopping trolley, that doesn't really have any meaning to you. So again, they accommodated that and changed it into a shopping bag. So those little tiny little things that just give extra meaning to our particular audiences that we're speaking to, and can give a lot of confidence to our users. This one I was quite inspired on this talk by a lady called Jenny Shen, and if you're interested in globalization, localization, she'd be a really good person to look up. She talked about different kind of visual contexts for our users. So this example is the Firefox homepage. On the left, the American version, and on the right, the Chinese version. You can see instantly that they're very different visually. And that's because different visuals can appeal to different cultures. Obviously, that's a generalization, but there is evidence to say that some cultures really relate to the kind of richer, busier environments, and some cultures relate to what you'd call a low context visual design. So the example for that would be a Scandinavian design, really stripped back. And by contrast, the very kind of busy streets of Japan with lots of lights and advertising, that's what they're more familiar with. So having that awareness is quite important. But there is another reason why these designs work well. And Jenny explained that if you're searching in Chinese, that it can take much longer than in Roman characters to construct a search query. So a lot of the sites are built for browsing, whereas we might go to the homepage of Google, bash out a search really quickly, get to what we're looking for. In Chinese, it can be a lot quicker to find what you're looking for by optimizing for browsing rather than for search. So just a couple of examples there of the things we can do to get things right. But there's so much more out there that we can delve into if we're aware of those particular cultures that we're speaking to. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about next. Why is it worth it? So we've established that it's worth it to communicate well with our customers, make things really global, really accessible. But I wanted to ask a question to dig a little bit deeper. So what can we gain by taking the time to understand people that live really differently to ourselves? And going back to the shopping cart and the search icon that Amazon researched, that was for their rural Indian market. So I want to show you why some companies have been exploring that and what lengths they've had to go to try and target those audiences. So Uber, Facebook, and Amazon have all been exploring rural Indian markets, a market that is quite untapped. The reason for that is that there are 47 million mobile internet users in rural India, and a lot of places have just got kind of 4G for the first time, and it opens up a brand new market for them. So what are the challenges inherent in that? These are the average mobile download speeds. Some examples for the UK, 40.9 megabytes, global average 6.3, and in India, the average is 4.1. If you go to rural areas, patchier internet, that's probably going to be even lower. So how do Uber, Amazon, and other organizations deal with that and present something that is still as successful as some of their other products? Well, this is Facebook Lite. It is essentially a version of Facebook that they have optimized for those particular areas. People on perhaps fairly basic smartphones, patchy internet, low bandwidth, and they've tackled all of those problems by creating a specific app for those areas. Facebook one is pretty similar. It looks very similar. It has a lot of the same functionality, but the visual approach, the text, the way it renders, and the image rendering is a lot more basic. So at first glance, it doesn't look quite as crisp. If you click on the images, then you'll get the high resolution one, but it's really optimized so that it doesn't take up too much of your data. Uber have done a similar thing. You'll notice that on our app, it's often the map comes up first. For this one, the map has gone to the back. You can access it, but that's not the primary face of the app when you open it. So small decisions, but a big impact in terms of people being able to use the software without it draining their resources as quickly. But the organization that I wanted to go into a little bit more depth on was the Amazon one. I'd seen that little comment about the ping pong bat search icon, thought it was interesting, dug into that a little bit more, and found a case study on the work that Amazon have been doing, and thought it was really, really fascinating. So these are the challenges that Amazon have faced. Basic smartphone users, poor internet connections, multiple languages, low literacy rates, audiences that don't have much experience of browsing the internet, people don't have bank accounts or online bank accounts, and a lot of people don't actually have postal addresses at all. So for an online shopping company that delivers, if you're going to read that list and do some kind of due diligence on whether you should go into that market, you'd probably say no. It's pretty stacked against you in terms of an online shopping company being successful with those kind of parameters. However, Amazon being Amazon and wanting to get as much money out of people as possible, have found a way to tackle every single one of those. So I'm just going to run you through those now. So multiple languages and low literacy rates. So in a lot of the big cities in India, especially because they have a lot of different languages across the country, they'll tend to use big websites in English. But Amazon is starting to trial having more localized languages, people being able to browse in their own language. So you can see that that's just a beta test for Hindi that's available at the moment. The other thing that they've done to tackle lower literacy rates is to use iconography across the whole site. So they've got icons for the different categories, for things like payments and offers, to try and support people that don't have as much literacy skills. So I went on the site and I changed it into the Hindi version to see how easy it was for me to navigate, considering I don't speak Hindi. And they had these really nice set of icons down the left that represent the different categories. So I assumed that this one with the little sofa and kitchenware was household. So I clicked on that and then I got this screen. I assumed that the pots and pans, something to do with kitchenware, cleaning materials here. I'm slightly concerned as to why there was a cat and dog. Was wondering whether I could buy a cat and dog on Amazon and get them delivered. Luckily, that was just pet food. That was all right. But I thought it was really successful, and I think they'd structured that so that it was really easily navigable without having to read the language. Technical experience. So that was another challenge that they faced. If you've not used online shopping before, or you've perhaps not used the internet at all before, you need a bit of support. So in this example, they're just explaining what the search bar is for. So if you don't know what the tiny ping pong bat means, you're learning that as they're kind of teaching you through tooltips around the site. This is my favourite bit. So this is a physical Amazon shop that you go into and you sit down on a chair and somebody helps you browse the internet and buy something on Amazon. And I just thought it was the absolute polar opposite of what Amazon have set themselves up to be. They are this at a distance, ship it out quickly, no personal touch, completely online. And here they are building a physical building in which to sell some of their products via a website. Seems completely bizarre. But it's actually really clever. So people come in, they go in, they're supported to buy something online. They've bought that thing, but they've also learned how to use an Amazon shop online. They've learned how to do that buying experience, and they can go away, and from that point they can do it themselves. So I think it's really, really clever. You could go in there, buy something, return it, try it on. People will support you through that, and they're really kind of educating people in that particular region how to shop online. Really, really clever. The next challenge was people who don't have bank accounts at all. And you'll see there that, again, there's a nice icon. You can pay on delivery. Again, something you would never, ever see on an Amazon site in other parts of the world. They have local people that do pickups and collections. But ultimately, Amazon is a home delivery company. So how have they dealt with the fact that people don't necessarily have postal addresses? So what the research said was that in some areas, someone's address will be behind the temple. That is where they live. And if you're local, you know where that means. If you're Amazon, you clearly don't. So the way they've tackled that is to have a kind of use my current location. You ping off your location, it logs it, and then from that point onwards, it knows where to deliver the goods. As well as that, they had drivers who were really familiar with the local area. So-and-so who lives behind the temple, they will know where that means. They can go and deliver that item. But what's really fascinating about all of this is that that guy on his delivery bike, he might be delivering a couple of pairs of socks that someone's bought online. And yet, what Amazon have put in to get to that point is quite astounding. So the different language versions, the user interface, the iconography that they've designed, the physical stores, training local people to be delivery drivers. It's a huge, huge amount of effort that's gone into these areas to deliver a couple of pairs of socks. But ultimately, they're after the volume of sales. And last year, they had 7 billion in sales. So it's clearly working for them, and it's clearly a market that people want a piece of. They think that's going to grow threefold over the next 3 years. And 80% of that is outside of India's biggest cities. So that localization piece, much as it seems like they've done a lot that goes against the basic model of their organization, it's clearly having a huge, huge impact. So I think they're a really good example of why culture matters. We've looked at why understanding our audiences can really kind of help us to build trust with them, communicate with them better, really have a better, more usable journey, and build that kind of rapport that they think that we understand them and we're talking specifically to them. We've looked at how we can get things right, whether we're trying to make something really global, or whether we're trying to localize like Amazon have done and really tap into a very, very specific audience. So I think hopefully what I've shown is evidence that it is worth going that extra mile, tapping into those audiences. It's worth it for our users. Obviously, we're communicating better with them, making a much better experience. It's worth it for our organizations, as Amazon have done. They're clearly making a lot of money by communicating with an audience that, to that point, had not been spoken to before. But ultimately, if you take one thing away from this, let's do it for Paul. Thank you very much.